Добрый день.
Good afternoon. I welcome all of you at yet another briefing of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation. Russian and foreign journalists are here today. We went online, and let's start from the Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov's plan. So on the 12th of October in Bishkek, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation will take part in yet another meeting of the Council of Ministers of the CIS. And let me remind you again that in 2023, Kyrgyzstan is the president of the CIS. The ministers will exchange opinions on regional as well as international topics. And we also plan to look into the multifaceted cooperation of the CIS countries, especially in light of the upcoming presidency of Russia in the organization. The ministers will adopt draft of joint statements on a number of important international topics, which will later be submitted for consideration by the CIS leaders on 30th October and approve the plan of interministerial consultations for 2024. Special attention will be paid to building up cooperation in law enforcement as well as cultural and humanitarian spheres, as well as expanding the CIS ties in the context of the Year of Russian Language of interethnic cooperation announced in CIS this year. Decisions will be taken aimed at this popularization in the Commonwealth as well as in the world. Now, as international agenda, we'll start with the Ukrainian crisis, as the Kiev regime continues to shell Russian towns, villages in cold blood, and Ukrainian militants do not hesitate to utilize the cluster munitions and attack drones against civilians. Such cynicism leads not only to the deaths of innocent people, but as well as the destruction of civil infrastructure, including residential buildings, schools, hospitals, and kindergarten. On October the 1st, the Ukrainian armed forces shelled the central market area in Shebek in the Belgorod region. 3 people were wounded. Facades of trade pavilions and municipal garages and 3 cars were damaged. On the night of 2nd October, the Nazis opened fire in residential areas of Novaya Kakhovka, and the civilian was killed. Often, the targets of neo-Nazis are religious sites. For example, on September the 13th, the Ukrainian armed forces hit in Nikolsky Monastery in DNR, injuring 2 people. Russian law enforcement agencies are constantly recording all these atrocities. The course of the Russian Federation, based on the evidence collected by the Russian Investigative Committee, continues to pass sentences on Ukrainian militants who have committed grave crimes against civilians. Last week, the punishes Skarlupov and Pahalsky were sentenced to 28 and 19 years imprisonment, respectively, were to serve in a strict regime colony for the murder of civilians, as well as shelling of residential areas in the DNR in the spring of 2022. The militant and neo-Nazi organization Azov Virbansky was sentenced to 22 years in prison. He shelled residential areas of Mariupol with mortars last March, and another neo-Nazi Lazovik was sentenced to 28 years in prison for killing a wounded in a prison of war in Mariupol. 3 neo-Nazis, Bondarev, Vaishenko, and Yimkevich, received 20 years in prison each for shelling civilian vehicles in Mariupol last spring. For each crime of a Kiev regime, however it had been committed by, it will be followed by respective punishment, which will be hard. And it was just recently when the Investigative Committee of Russia announced the completion of investigation into the case of a member of Verkhovная Rada Parasyuk, who in March of 2016 participated in an action by radical structures illegally entering the territory of the Consulate General of Russia. He ripped the national flag of Russia, took it to the protesters, and trampled it. He also publicly called on those present to commit unlawful acts against the diplomatic institution and staff, and the criminal case against Parasyuk has been sent to the court to decide whether to refer him to court. He goes on international wanted list, and the Investigative Committee of Russia has charged him in absentia with the use of drones. This concerns the head of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, Main Intelligence Directorate Ilinchuk, Commander Nishpapa, and the commander of 383rd Separate Regiment of remotely piloted drones Budinyak were also to be put on the wanted list. On October the 2nd, Kyiv hosted an informal meeting of the EU foreign ministers, chaired by the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. But I think that it's the policy of danger now. So we were presided by Josep Borrell, and this session was defined by them as a brainstorming fashion, but I think that it's like storming the brains of the EU, bearing in mind that the perspectives for further financing of the Kyiv regime were not clear. The Europeans had promised to support the regime, and we had promised to continue to do so, but it's of interest that the ministers of Hungary and Poland did not reach the Ukrainian capital, and both Budapest and Warsaw had accumulated a lot of claims for Zelensky's policy. It turned out that this brainstorming session did not lead to any significant results, and European diplomats had failed to agree on the next allocation of military aid to Ukraine in the amount of 5 billion euros in 2024, and now this amount is to be agreed on by the end of the year. But let's be frank, it's not financial aid in the amount of 5 billion euros. It's not any aid to Ukraine. It's those money they are to spend to kill people with the help of the Kyiv regime. This money is going to be spent on killing Ukrainians. What influenced this decision is they had not agreed on the amount, and that Washington, albeit for a short period of time, of 45 days, left Kyiv without cash allowance, and political scientists agree on that. The temporary budget adopted by the U.S. Congress on September the 13th seriously alarmed Brussels, and Borrell has already promised that he will continue to ask Biden not to cut off funding for Ukraine. But let's be clear, this is not financial aid, this is not financing Ukraine, it's financing the atrocities that the Kyiv regime leads at the expense of the West. We have repeatedly said that the European Union has lost its autonomy and its sovereignty long ago. At the same time, it's obvious that not all of the EU citizens have any rights to vote, even inside their countries, because not everyone inside their countries are ready to continue to blindly spend money on the maintenance of Kyiv junta, especially bear in mind the fact that despite the efforts of Western sponsors, the Ukrainian budget deficit is growing rapidly, and the so-called collective West does not intend to abandon its goal of inflicting, as we put it, strategic defeat on Russia, so they call on Bundestag to hand over the Taurus cruise missiles to Kyiv, as the chairman of the Committee on Defense, Maria-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, has said, and she says that she considers the potential strikes on the territory of Russia with these missiles justified, and this is a statement full of Russophobia and revanchism, and it makes us understand that Berlin has not realized what this thoughtless pumping of arms against the criminal Kyiv regime could lead to. The other day, responded to the request to comment on the public participation of the CS division in Galicia. The president of the German said that they were not ready to call the Banderites anti-Semites and Nazis in general. I have another question to Maria-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann. What does she think of the CSS division Galicia? I think it's a question which you can give a clear and easy answer to. This will make us understand why she supports this pumping of arms of the Kyiv regime, and why does she think that those potential strikes on the territory of Russia are justified? I don't think it will be difficult to answer this question. The question concerning your attitude towards the Galicia division and the OU and UPA. So what I have cited directly speaks of the fact that the German authorities seem to have forgotten the lessons of history, but they are to remember them better than anywhere else. We are to be more sensitive and intolerant to any manifestation of inhumane ideology, no matter where it occurs. However, we see the contrary, as Berlin denies the generally recognized fact that Ukrainian nationalism collaborated with Hitler's Third Reich, and hence a conclusion: in today's Germany, the rehabilitation of Nazism is in full swing. However, there are people who are more cynical than that, the Anglo-Saxons, who are ready to exterminate all Ukrainians to achieve their goals. They are to rehabilitate no matter what, the UN OPA, the Galicia division. I think the next step will be the so-called heroes of the Third Reich. Former British Defense Minister Ben Wallace has complained that the average age of Ukrainian soldiers is 40 years. He has called on Zelensky to actively mobilize the young. Does this not remind you of anything? It does remind me of Hitlerjugend. London does not care about Ukraine's future because what's at stake is the realization of its cherished dream, the strategic defeat on Russia, inflicting it with foreign hands. And for that purpose, it's necessary to throw Ukrainians into the battle without regard for casualties, without the regard of this once populous republic. And this goal could not have been achieved this way. The British Isles don't rule out the deployment of its regular military units to Ukraine. I'm not making this up. This scenario was suggested by the country's current defense minister, Grant Shapps. So these are the kind of people they appoint. How he was appointed is a question to me, bearing in mind his former history. It was either him or somebody else who had came up with this idea, because the current British defense minister then hastened to retract his own words. But we know what those British defense ministers say is what many British authorities think. And against this background, we should pay attention to the report of the New York Times of September 29th. So the Pentagon Hospital in Landstuhl had begun accepting wounded American mercenaries. According to the paper, here in this hospital, 40 U.S. citizens are now being treated there, and they had fought on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces. Please tell me if this is just the New York Times who had came up, who had found this out. So what do Pentagon, the State Department could say on that? Because they care about it in the most faraway regions. We're talking about Ukrainian citizens. Are we going to see the official statement of the State Department on that? We see that how inadequate the West is when conducting its foreign policy, how Russophobic it is, how we seek to help Ukraine killing it, in fact. And we see that all those goals of the special military operations are very acute. And the 29th of September, the President of the Russian Federation has signed a decree, because as we see, last year, Kiev regime decided to introduce a visa regime for Russian citizens, unilaterally terminating the bilateral intergovernmental agreement on visa-free travel. And let me remind you that before that, there had never been a visa regime between Russia and Ukraine. And even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, now where was here, Kiev regime decided to introduce a visa regime for Russian citizens, unilaterally terminating the bilateral intergovernmental agreement on visa-free travel. And let me remind you that before that, there had never been a visa regime between Russia and Ukraine. And even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, now where was a free trade of our citizens, but this decision was aimed at making human contacts as difficult as possible. And the Russian side has repeatedly said that we will not take the lead we will not play off against ordinary people interested in maintaining their family and spiritual ties. And based on this humanitarian logic, the visa-free regime for Ukrainian citizens was retained in the adopted decree of the President of Russian Federation. The draft of which underwent a thorough study, consolidated the existing order of those conditions terminated by the Kiev regime. So Ukrainians will continue to enter Russia not only without visas, but also using their internal passports, even if they have expired. The ability to come to Russia and stay there freely is extremely important for numerous Ukrainian refugees, residents of our new regions who are yet to obtain their Russian passports, as well as citizens of our country who have relatives and friends in Ukraine. And now to continue with those hatred with the last week. It was the 82nd anniversary of the Babi Yar tragedy. So in 1941, in just 2 days, on September 29th and the 30th, 1941, the Hitler's invaders and militants killed more than 30,000 Jews, so about 20% of the Jewish population in Kiev. This punitive action was just the beginning. It was just the prologue of mass shootings of old people, women and children, Soviet prisoners of war and underground fighters of all nationalities from 1941 to 1943. More than 100,000 people were executed, and Babi Yar became an international grave and a symbol of the inhumane cruelty of the Nazis. So this year at events in Kiev on September 29th, the president of Ukraine said, quote unquote, "It is very important to always remember history," quote unquote. Well, yes, with some kind of a broken clock that show the right time twice a day. If we're talking about a mechanical clock, it's hard to disagree with that. The problem is that this clock is really broken because Zelensky himself persistently tries to forget everything that's linked to the past of his own country, the nation that he thinks he's part of, and his own family. So on September 22nd, the whole world saw a footage of him applauding the so-called veteran of the SS Galicia division, Hunka. So did he forget for a second that his own grandfather fought in the Red Army against this kind of traitors and collaborators as this Hunka? Or did he not forget this for a second? Judging by our steps taken by the Kiev regime, he did not forget about this for a second. This some kind of amnesia that just goes on. And it's of no surprise because the glorification of Nazi Banderite thugs has long been a phenomenon familiar to the Ukraine under the Kiev regime. The authorities try to erase those from people's memory the heroism of the Red Army soldiers, and at the same time we whitewash Hitler and his soldiers, and those role in the deaths of civilians is not only silenced but it's purposefully glorified. So honor festive processions are held, monuments are built and erected, stadiums and streets are renamed. This is some kind of where taken a prisoner in 790 tanks were destroyed, more than 2,000 aircrafts, more than 2,000 guns, more than 7,000 tankers, and so on. During these battles, Krasnodar region, Kalmykia, Chechen, Ingushetia, Northern Ossetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, Rostov region, Stavropol region, Cherkasy, Karachay, and again autonomous regions were liberated. The old fields of Maikop were returned to the Soviet army, to the Soviet authorities, as well as the most important agricultural areas. The feats of the defenders were highly appreciated by the leadership of the country. On January 25th, the Medal for the Defense of the Caucasus was established. It was awarded to more than 870,000 participants. More than 100 people were awarded the title of heroes of Youth Union. The people of North Caucasus and Transcaucasia will always remember this sacrifice, and this feat of Soviet soldiers should serve as a constant reminder to our country as well as other countries, but it was together that we won, and that on the unity of all the peoples of Soviet Union depended not only our fate, but the fate of the entire world. And it's not just Russia that talks about these days, but the countries of a so-called world majority on the African as well as Asian region and in Latin America talk about it these days, because without the victory in the Second World War, no decolonization would ever have been started, and the nations would never have achieved independence, sovereignty from the colonial regime. Another important thing.
It's an interesting date, the 11th of October. It's the anniversary of the Zemsky Sobor in Moscow. The Kiev Rus state, and it was according to a request by the Cossacks who suffered from Polish oppression. As it was said, under the high hand of the Moscow sovereign, it meant war with Poland, but the opinion was united, was unanimous. It was just in accordance with the interests and aspirations of forcibly separated Russian lands. And after the Mongol Tatar invasion, the old Russian states was significantly weakened, which was taken advantage of by its neighbors. Already in the 14th century, the Lithuanians captured many lands, and the Poles seized southwestern Russian lands, Galicia and western Volhynia. Bukovina was included in the Moldovan Principality, and it went to the Hungarian Kingdom in the 11th century. In the 15th century, Turkey seized Moldavia and South Russian lands, and they were put into the dependence of the Crimean Khanate. In the 16th century, Poland seized the left bank of the Dnieper and some other lands, and however, the Russian people were not assimilated. It was the high level of economic and cultural development, the internal strength, and the ethnic and economic, cultural, political ties being preserved and continuing to develop. It was the period of fragmentation of the Kiev Rus. The Russian people just struggled against the enslavers and wished to restore their unity. Back then, the enemies were the Turks and the Crimean Tatars, as well as the Polish Pans, and the struggle was led by the Cossacks of the Zaporizhian Sich and the Don. In 1612, the liberation struggle grew, and the lands captured by the Poles sought to reunite with Eastern Russia, with Moscow. And that all led to the war against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky led the struggle against the impression of Poland. And Russia provided help to the rebels, as they said back then, with bread and cannons, as well as diplomatic methods. The representatives of Russia addressed the Russian sovereigns to take it under its high hand. Such plans often appeared among the Cossacks. In February 1651, the Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich spoke about his readiness to accept Malorussia as his subject and announced his consent in June 1653. And the Zemsky Sobor made its final decision on the 11th of October 1653. On the 8th of January 1654, the Pereslavl Rada unanimously spoke about the reunification with Moscow, Russia. It was the unification of the United Russian people divided during the Mongol Tatar invasion, and the unification began back then. So now this anniversary of the Zemsky Sobor has a symbolic significance. That year, Azov region, Kherson region, and Donbass just returned to Russia. They considered themselves as part of Russian world, and their free and legitimate choice should be respected. And any attempts to influence them by force are doomed to failure. And there is one more announcement about the Cultural Center of Glavo-PDK. The presentation of this series territory in education, science and sports. We will post this announcement on our website and in social media. I invite all the media representatives to cover this very interesting and relevant event. Is Международная жизнь, international life with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. In Tambov, the Mural Art Festival has finished, and there was a picture of Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Primakov there. How did you say mural art? So it was on the rocks, now it is on the walls. Very well. So it's just the implementation of this project. How would you comment on that in the context of the upcoming Teachers' Day? So just some projects, they remain on the rocks in a bad sense of this word, and some of them go to the walls. So the year 2023 was declared in Russia the year of the teacher and mentor. The Mentors Quarter in Tambov became a contribution of artists to this year's program. So it was just their vision. When I first heard about this project, I just thought maybe we misunderstood something, but then I saw that we understood everything correctly. This festival dedicated to Russian mentorship and culture, it's just passing knowledge, experience in many areas of life, and the characters of these murals, who are they? They're just prominent figures in art, in sports, in politics, those who become people who inspire young people. So among the works of the festival, there is, so to say, a portrait. It's not a drawing, it's a portrait, a depiction of Mr. Primakov and Mr. Lavrov. I would like to remind you that this project is implemented on the initiative of the Russian Society's NANI, and Sergei Lavrov is a member of the League of Lecturers of this society. I think this project is quite successful, and in the text of today's briefing we will post a link to this mural, and your task is to estimate, to provide your opinion. I would like to highlight that the Foreign Ministry learned about this initiative already when it was has been nearly implemented. It was just a sovereign decision of non-governmental structures of civil society. When they passed to the final stage, they asked our opinion on some details, and we provided our input there. But the initiative was from the civil society. I would like to underline that. Do you have any other questions? If not, we will move on. Russia Today, please. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first one, in Pristina, there were accusations about the death of 3 Serbs and one Kosovar policeman. How would Russia comment on the accusations of Serbia, and just observing that in silence? You know better than all of us that the leadership of Serbia has already commented in detail the accusations by Pristina, and no doubts have been left that the Pristina accusations are just pointless. They do not have any grounds. And the dialogue on Kosovo, it demonstrates that the only side that seeks some legal, civilized outcome is Belgrade. With the consideration of the historical context of modern situation, the European Union has completely discredited itself as a moderator. It's in the Balkans, and there will be questions about Armenia as well today. There were just promises. It was just provocative actions that led to the detonation of the situation that should have been and could have been resolved in a legal manner, taking into account the historical peculiarities of the situation. So any attempts to demonstrate that Serbia is a warmonger, it is just absurd, and it aims at discreditation of Belgrade, and to draw attention, to divert attention from the ethnic cleansing that is underway in the province. So the Prime Minister Kurti, he just turned the intimidation of non-Albanian population into a daily routine after his terrible words that the Serbs in Kosovo should, citation, suffer and pay. So they have just a desire to protect themselves, their families, homes, their culture and traditions. What is normal values for a normal person, the true values. So, with regard to the international presence in Kosovo, under the auspices of NATO and the EU, they have not had any desire to fulfill their mandates, and they were not going to do that. They're just playing along with Pristina, as they have already done. So one more question. It's just the Western sponsors of the Western sponsors and the Pristina authorities accused the Serbian Orthodox Church of smuggling weapons into northern Kosovo and Metohija. So what are the attempts to involve the church in the conflict? It's just not connected with the trend. It's just the Western policy that destroys the Orthodox faith all over the world. They just attack the Orthodox Church. It's just attacked by the West. It has previously been in a secret manner. Now it is in a direct manner. They interrogate, they arrest clergymen, and they undertake provocative actions that do not correspond to any moral norms, ethical norms. They just make people quarrel, people who of Orthodox faith, and they invent some new history of global religions. So it's no surprise that now the Serbian Orthodox Church is an object of attention by the collective West, an object of aggression. Now I can just confirm that in the region, in the Balkans, they know better than anywhere else that the Serbs have been on those lands for centuries, and the Orthodox faith has been present there for centuries, and it has always been a bone in the throat of the Kosovo Albanian separatism. So here we need to consider the regional aspect of the situation and to see the global trend as with regard to aggression against the Orthodox people. So I just wanted to pass on to Russia Today. Sorry, yes, we would like to ask a question about the estimations from Moscow by the European Union mission in Nagorno-Karabakh. So if we take the latest events, the fighting on the 19th and the 20th of September, so just the European observers, their position is just mean. It's the meanest one. They just made promises and led Yerevan into some of their trap, and they just became silent witnesses of the development of the situation. And with regard to the agreements that were made under the mediatorship of Moscow, it was the Western community that led them away from those agreements, and Brussels was among the main and the first supporters of not following the agreements of Moscow, Yerevan and Baku, and follow some special way. And where the special way led, we just witnessed today. As the Russian peacemakers being mediators in the ceasefire agreements, it was just witnessed by the European Union, and they did not provide any assistance. So, following the end of the Lachen corridor blockade, humanitarian aid there, and normalization of relations between Baku and Yerevan, the European Union just witnessed that in silence. Silently, just telling the Armenian citizens some fairy tales about Russian deception. It's not Russian deception. Russia has always been near them, has always stopped the bloodshed in the region. And Yerevan was just discouraged to follow those agreements by the European Union. It was the betrayal of the European Union. So we evacuated more than 100 of victims of this Stepanakert explosion. Where were those supporters back then? They did not participate in the fightings where the Russian peacekeepers died. They just intensified the fightings. So let us tell it directly. The European Union mission does not provide any stability. It's just investigation monitoring for the interests of Brussels and provoking the situation. some loud and deceptive speeches, statements are more than enough. And recently, an interview by Charles Michel has been published about the so-called betrayal by Russia of the Armenian citizens, not lack of reaction to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. I would like to remind Charles Michel and all of his supporters that it was the European Union who convened this summit in Brussels, where the Azerbaijani leadership was recognized. Or is it not the case? Before that, the Armenian leadership just made contrary statements, saying that about the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, and Charles Michel, he was just referring to the agreements without reference to the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. Why did the EU not propose to care about the security of the residents of Nagorno-Karabakh? That was because the European Union, all those Charles Michel, Borrell, and Ursula von der Leyen, they were just engaged in provocation. And they did not care about the security of the residents. They just cared about our country, about anti-Russian, Russophobic approach in all their actions. And now they're just trying to denigrate the actions of our country to clear themselves of the responsibility, just denigrating Moscow. No, it's Brussels that is responsible for all the agreements that have been achieved. 3 agreements between Moscow, Yerevan, and Baku have been literally changed by those summits on the territory of the EU countries. And the Yerevan stance was formed in a way under the influence of the EU, as they have informed just several months ago. And before that, the position was just the contrary. It's just the sovereign right of the Armenian authorities to form their position. But that should be coherent and expressed in an open way. We will see the results of this summit in Grenada. And yesterday, French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna
made a statement saying that Russia had failed to fulfill its obligations when settling the relations between Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan, but it's not France which should be talking about responsibilities, as France was the co-sponsor and the guarantor of fulfilling the Minsk obligations. But what we learned later on from Mr. Hollande is what they never planned to fulfill them. So if I was Catherine Colonna, I would keep silent about any kind of guarantees and obligations to help settle conflicts between countries in such situations where France thinks itself to be some kind of a mediator. I think that's a Security Council resolution, no less. But let's get back to the Catherine Colonna's statement. It's another lie, another attempt of the French authorities to play up the Karabakh situation. And now, as for what Russia did, for real, Russia helped the bloodshedding on the 9th of October. We have fulfilled a complex of statements from 2020 to 2023, a so-called roadmap for making up between Nagorno-Karabakh, which was later copied by the EU and the US, and then later on it was distorted to serve their own interests without caring for the people of the region. Russia made sure that the fighting stopped there, and that we help